Rosa Parks headed to work on December 1st, 1955 on the Cleveland Avenue bus to Court Square. It was a typical pre-winter morning in the Alabama capital, chilly and raw, topcoat weather. Outside the Montgomery Fair department store, a Salvation Army Santa rang his bell for coins in front of window displays of toy trains and mannequins modeling reindeer sweaters. Every afternoon, when school let out, hordes of children would invade the store to gawk at the giant Christmas tree draped with blinking lights, a mid-1950s electrical marvel. But Rosa Parks saw little of the holiday glitter down in the small tailor shop in the basement next to the huge steam presses, where the only hint of Yuletide cheer came from a sagging, water-stained banner reading, "Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year." Not that many of Montgomery Fair's lower-level employees had the time to let the faded decoration make them sad. The department store rang up nearly half of its sales between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day, which turned the tailor shop into a beehive of activity every December. But even on days spent frenetically hemming, ironing, and steam pressing, Parks' mind was more with the NAACP than her workday duties. She was in the midst of organizing a workshop to be held at Alabama State University on December 3rd through 4th, and spent the morning during her coffee break telephoning H. Council Trenholm, president of the university, applying enough quiet persuasion to be granted the use of a classroom over the weekend. I was also getting the notices in the mail. For the election of officers of the senior branch of the NAACP, which would be the next week, Parks recalled. That afternoon, she lunched with Fred Gray, the lawyer who defended Claudette Colvin, and she was serving as Clifford Durr's protege at his law office above the Sears Auto Tire store. When 1 p.m. came and the lunch hour ended, Miss Parks went back to her work as a seamstress. Gray would write in his civil rights memoir, "Bus Ride to Justice." I continued my work and left the office in the early afternoon for an out-of-town engagement. A says, characterization. How did Parks' work for the NAACP differ from her job at the store? Why do you think Brinkley chose to highlight these differences? Shortly after 5 p.m., Rosa Parks clocked out of work and walked the block to Court Square to wait for her bus home. It had been a hard day, and her body ached, from her feet swollen from the constant standing to the throbbing, from the pain, from the strain in her chronic bursitis. But the bus stand was packed, so Parks, disinclined to jockey for a rush-hour seat, crossed Dexter Avenue to do a little shopping at Lee Cutt's Braid Drug. She had decided to treat herself to a heating pad, but found them too pricey. Instead, she bought some Christmas gifts, along with aspirin, toothpaste, and a few other sun-dries, and headed back to the bus stop, wondering how her husband's day had been at the Maxwell Air Force Base barbershop, and thinking about what her mother would cook for dinner. B is characterization. Reread lines 30 through 39. What do Rosa Parks' thoughts and actions reveal about her? It was in this late-day reverie that Rosa Parks dropped her dime in the box and boarded the yellow Olive City bus. She took an aisle seat in the racially neutral middle section, behind the movable sign which read "Colored." She was not expecting any problems, as there were several empty spaces at the whites-only front of the bus. A black man was sitting next to her on her right and staring out the window. Across the aisle sat 2 black women deep in conversation. At the next 2 stops, enough white passengers got on to nearly fill up the front section. At the 3rd stop, in front of the Empire Theater, a famous shrine to country music fans as the stage where the legendary Hank Williams got his start, the last front seats were taken, with 1 man left standing. The bus driver twisted around and locked his eyes on Rosa Parks. Her heart almost stopped when she saw it was James F. Blake, the bully who had put her off his bus 12 years earlier. She didn't know his name, but since that incident in 1943, she had never boarded a bus that Blake was driving. This day, however, she had absent-mindedly stepped in. "Move, y'all, I want those 2 seats," the driver barked on behalf of Jim Crow, which dictated that all 4 blacks in the row of the middle section would have to surrender their seats to accommodate a single white man, as no colored could be allowed to sit parallel with him. A stony silence fell over the bus, but nobody moved. "Y'all better make it light on yourselves and let me have those seats," Blake sputtered, more impatiently than before. Quietly and in unison, the 2 black women sitting across from Parks rose and moved to the back. Her seatmate quickly followed, and she swung her legs to the side to let him out. Then Parks slid over to the window and gazed out at the Empire Theater marquee promoting A Man Alone, a new Western starring Ray Milland. C is characterization. Reread lines 50 through 64. What do you learn about Rosa Parks from the way she reacted to the bus driver's commands? The next 10 seconds seemed like an eternity to Rosa Parks. As Blake made his way toward her, all she could think about were her forebears, who Maya Angelou would put it, took the lash, the branding iron, and untold humiliations while only praying that their children would someday flesh out the dream of equality. But unlike the poet, it was not Africa in the days of the slave trade that Parks was thinking about. It was racist Alabama in the here and now. She shuddered with the memory of her grandfather back in Pine Level, keeping watch for the KKKs every night with a loaded shotgun in his lap, echoing abolitionist John Brown's exhortation, "Talk, talk, talk." That didn't free the slaves. What is needed is action, action. So when Parks looked up at Blake, his hard, thoughtless scowl filled her with pity. She felt fearless, bold, and serene. "Are you going to stand up?" the driver demanded. Rosa Parks looked straight at him and said, "No." Flustered and not quite sure what to do, Blake retorted, "Well, I'm going to have you arrested." And Parks, still sitting next to the window, replied softly, "You may do that." Her majestic use of may rather than can put Parks on the high ground, establishing her as a protester and not a victim. "When I made that decision," Parks stated later, "I knew I had strength of my ancestors with me, and obviously their dignity as well." And her formal, dignified no uttered a suppertime bust in the cradle of the Confederacy as darkness fell, ignited the collective no of black history in America, a defiance as liberating as John Brown's on the gallows in Harper's Ferry. D says characterization. How does Brinkley convey Rosa Parks' dignity and strength? This is Rosa by Rita Dove. I'm reading it again. How she sat there, the time right inside a place so wrong it was ready. That trim name with its dream of a bench to rest on, her sensible coat. Doing nothing was the doing, the clean flame of her gaze carved by a camera flash. How she stood up when they bent down to retrieve her purse. That courtesy. E says do I need to do the questions? Okay. E says paradox. A paradox is a figure of speech in which a seemingly contradictory statement reveals some insider truth. How is the thought
Mrs. Spader's bus is on campus. If you ride Mrs. Spader's bus, please make your way to the front. Mrs. Spader's bus.
How is the thought expressed in line 7 a paradox? F says characterization. Which images portray Rosa Parks as a modest, unextravagant person? Which portray her as strong and serious?